You feel me? But like I don't got no social media, none of that. Like, so like we was like this right here. I don't.
What about her? Does she have social media, Snapchat?
Yeah, she got a Facebook, but the kids like got Snapchat, Instagram, and all that on her phone. For as I know, just like you say, like I don't know, but for as I know, we was like this here.
What about the broken phone and the?
That was my phone.
That's your
phone. That's what I'm trying.
How did it get broken?
Cause she flipping out. Boo, you just trying to leave, la la la. Cause I'm really mad because you keep going out every weekend. So I'm gonna get my point across. I'm finna call my sister, tell my sister come get me. I ain't really finna go nowhere for
it. What sister? Okay, I didn't talk to him. I talked to.
Despite Gable's claims that Addie started going out on weekends, there's no evidence to prove she was interested in other men besides Gable, unfortunately. On the other hand, there is evidence that Adolf was involved with other women, evidence that he will very painstakingly detail as he attempts to explain the stab mark in the TV.
How'd the TV get broken?
The TV, that been broke for like, it been broke for probably about probably about 3 months ago. Cause she flipped out, cause I used her car one night. I go to the club. A girl, like, she takes I text her phone and was like, I'm not gonna lie. I text her phone that she get up to go to work like 6:30 in the morning. She go through my phone and see the text. She come in the room, go flip like, tearing the TV up and all that. I'm like, damn, what you doing all that for?
What you used to tear the TV up?
The same knife. The same knife. She scratching the TV up. What I'm telling her, like, I didn't do nothing with the girl. The girl gave me a lap dance. She put a number in my phone. I was wrong for even texting her that. I was trying to really like get her to leave the club because I would have cheated that night.
Y'all still use that TV?
That TV, hell no, that bitch don't work.
It don't work.
Why y'all ain't throwing it out?
Huh?
Why y'all ain't throwing it out?
Because we paid $20. We bought it from the pawn shop for $20 lean. I don't know.
You think she was stepping out on you then?
No, I don't think she was stepping out on me. No, I don't. If I would have thought that, like, I got people that I could have, like, I can go stay with my big sister. I can go stay with my cousin. Like, if it was like that, I would have been left. It wasn't that serious. Like, I don't believe that. I ain't finna sit here and try to tell myself like that was what it was. Like, cause I know me and her, she go to work. She leave at 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock. You know, if you around a person constantly, like, you could tell, like, they go in the bathroom with the phone or, like, her code to her phone is my birthday. Like, I got permission to touch her phone at any time. She broke that phone because she bought that phone for me. So, like, when she was breaking the phone, I don't care you about that. It wasn't that deep to me. If you see my clothes on the couch, like I was getting my clothes. See, this what I believe. If I would never touch my clothes, everything would have been straight. That's what I believe. If I would have touched them clothes, everything would have been straight. It just, she got to the point of, you trying to leave.
Why didn't she want you to leave?
I don't know. I really don't. I really can't say.
I mean, you working?
No, I get disability. Social Security disability.
She usually take care of the kids while she's at work?
Yeah. I take kids to school. You can ask them, like, I do everything I can. I walk around with nothing to make sure I don't care. I'm going to pay for whatever I got to pay for as long as they straight.
Not necessarily meaning that it meant to happen, but she just got out of control.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I'm not here to tell no lies or tell no story or play with y'all, because this one thing I know about the police. Y'all going to get down to the bottom of it. But I'm telling you, that shit wasn't supposed to go how it went. If y'all went in that house, y'all seen my clothes out that closet, y'all seen, I was trying to really like leave, like I'm getting my shoes. That's why my shoes right there, because I was demonstrating. I'm getting my shoes. Why I'm getting my shoes, you doing all this here. If I was that bad, if I was that type of person, why ain't something been happening?
I'm not saying, and he's not saying you're that type of person.
But he just said, what if something really bad happened? Like, okay, something really bad. I wouldn't be in here if something really bad didn't happen. Something really bad did happen.
An accident happened.
Yes.
What happened?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's
and I believe that. I believe it was an accident.
Yes, man.
I don't think you meant for this to happen.
Hell no.
I mean, like I said, you ain't had nothing on your record since 2015. Y'all ain't never had no problems.
Because I'm not that type. Because I know I got a cousin, a brother, sister. Like, what am I gonna you up for when I can just get my shit and leave?
But something about tonight was different.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Like, get off of me. You biting and scratching. Get off of me, man. Let me go.
One of the first things Gable said in this interview was, "I'm not gonna lie." Yet his entire story so far has been nothing but lies. And pretty soon, detectives are gonna call him out on every single one of them.
But you and I both know, Adolph, that you didn't push her and she didn't fall into that knife. You and I both know that.
So what I did with the knife then?
I'm saying you had it in your hand. I'm not saying that you meant to. I'm not saying that this is some kind of, I'm not saying you're a bad guy. Maybe you picked it up and stabbed the TV out of anger and you turned and she was just there. I don't know. But the whole she fell into the knife doesn't make sense, buddy.
I don't.
Dude, the knife's laying right here with nothing for it to even fall back against. I mean,
that's what I'm tripping off. Like, when I push her, how the hell did it go? That's the part that got me freaking. Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, you, boom.
It don't make sense. I mean,
exactly.
It don't make sense.
Exactly. You right. It don't.
How long has that TV been tore up?
Probably about. It been about 3, 4, 5. It been about 3, 4, 5 months ago.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Several months ago.
About 3, 4, 5 months ago. Yeah. I can't remember the exact day or nothing, but I remember all that occurred when I went to Eaton's over there on. Is that? It's on. Yeah. I remember all that occurred that night. I'm not no bad person. I'm not no violent person.
Nobody said you're a bad person. Nobody said you're a violent person. But accidents happen.
Exactly.
Accidents happen.
Exactly.
And we have to be able to explain those accidents.
Mm-hmm.
And the current explanation that the knife was just laying there and she fell back into it.
No, I ain't say she fell. I'm admitting that I pushed.
She pushed her.
Yeah, I'm admitting that.
I know.
I come here and be like, I don't know what happened.
But that knife didn't wind up in her back like that from getting shoved, is what we're saying. There ain't no way. It's just laying on the counter. You got to have something to stop that knife for it to go in her back. It's not just going to be sitting there. And
so by me shoving her,
that knife went in her that damn far. There ain't no damn way.
So it didn't go in her. You see what I'm saying? Remember I said, when I pulled it out, it looked like it wasn't that far in her.
Halfway, yeah.
I'm telling you, maybe I pushed her that hard, but I'm telling you, I will admit to that. When I pushed her, like, it was off me. When I pushed her, boom, it was like that. When I looked up, she bleeding. It was like coming out of her mouth.
Did she fall to the ground or anything? Or she
like, no, because I was like, oh shit. And I told my little girl, I was like, cut the shower on, because I was trying to keep the church, like my little girl from sitting. I was like, go cut the shower on. My little girl walked in the room. She was like, oh, mama. That's when I started like, and then when I got her like to the house, she was like, I can't breathe. That's when I started panicking.
And like I said, and I don't think you meant for this to happen. I don't think you're a bad guy. I don't think I think for whatever reason that things just got out of control and maybe you had it in your hand and you turned and she was there. You didn't mean to. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't remember, like, for me, like, picking that knife up. No.
How did the holster, the sheath of it get in the kitchen then?
The holster in the kitchen?
Yeah, the sheath.
Cause like it made me so mad because when I snatched it out of her back, I see the piece right there. So I was like, man. And I grabbed the thing and I threw it on the floor. Then I walked outside. because I had a little marijuana in my pocket. And I threw the marijuana on the ground. I was like, man, what the? Because if y'all go watch the camera, y'all can see me out the door like, I'm like panicking.
Because it was an accident.
Exactly.
You didn't mean for this to happen.
No. Hell no. Hell no. That's my wife, man. I've been with this girl 15 years, man.
And it wasn't supposed to end this way.
I think she just made you mad tonight for some reason.
I never. Why would I?
That's the thing. I mean, there's no explanation as to why you. I mean, I don't think
that's
you're
what I'm saying.
killer.
Like, why would I get that mad when I got people house to go to? That don't make sense, man. If you got somewhere to go, what I'm saying? Okay, she cheating. If I thought she cheating, I'ma sit in your house. I'ma let you go cheat. I got a sister house. I got a cousin house. I got a brother house. I'ma sit here and be Boo Boo the fool.
Surprise, surprise, Gable is Boo Boo the Fool. Later investigation showed the table was far too low relative to Addie's torso height. There was no way she could have fallen in a way that caused the knife to pierce her upper back. The only way such a fatal injury could have happened is if Addie was sitting or squatting in an unnatural position at the moment of impact. But that scenario doesn't match the blood evidence at the crime scene or anything Gable has claimed so far. Yet somehow Gable will continue with his lies, armed with nothing but his unbuttoned pants.
I get $800 and some dollars. I get enough money to take care of myself. That don't make sense. Like, I'm not no violent person.
But what we're telling you is that knife sitting on that counter, I ain't gonna stab her in the back like that. There ain't no way. Not physically possible. Not even a 10% chance, 5% chance, 1% chance. That physically cannot happen.
No, because I'm trying to think that, I swear I'm trying to think like.
And I don't know what Sergeant Coxwell thinks, but I think it was still an accident. I think it was still an accident.
I'm trying to figure out like, I can't, hey, man, y'all, shit. Hey.
You might have been mad or whatever. I don't know.
No, but that's what I'm saying. How can I get that?
I think you're just showing out.
Showing out?
Yeah, you're mad, you're showing out. I don't think you stabbed her on purpose. I think you stabbed the TV on purpose.
I ain't, that's what I'm saying. Like, I can't admit to something that I don't know, man. I don't know.
The thing about it is like your story changes from when you had the sheath on it to when it wasn't on it to when it was in the kitchen.
I never said. I said if you look at my room window, you look at my kitchen window. Somebody shot my kitchen window and my room window.
I understand.
The knife been sitting right there for months without the thing on it. I might act like a retard, but I'm not. I know what I said. That knife been sitting on that thing for months at a time. Was my red knife open?
No.
Oh, well, I'm surprised it wasn't. I cut all my nails with that knife. With that red knife, I cut all my nails out with.
No, it was closed. It was in the living room by the
on the little, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What the thing happened is you picked up the knife, you showing out to her.
Nah.
And you stabbed her with it.
Nah.
And then you freaked out and you went out, called 911, and you threw the thing down then.
Nah, I threw the thing down because, like, when I took the knife out of her, the piece was right there, and I just grabbed it, and I was like, man. And I just thought, y'all right, it might be in the kitchen. I don't remember. I thought I threw it outside on the ground. I just can't remember. Well, I'm not here to move down or all that. Like, I don't know.
Here's the thing, Adolf. You do know, buddy. You do know. And like I said, I'm not saying that you're cold-hearted. Dude, I've talked to plenty of people that are cold-hearted, that kill people they didn't care about on purpose. I ain't saying you're that guy. I don't think you're that guy.
I'm not no cold-hearted person.
I don't think you are.
For real, I don't know, man. I can't tell. Like, I know I ain't black. I know I ain't that lit. I drunk 2 shots and 2 bills. 2 big Bud Ice and 2 shots. I know I'm not that lit.
No. But the problem we're having right now is that the problem I'm having is that you're telling a story that's not plausible. You see what I'm saying? So I think you're hiding something. But I don't think you're hiding something as in you meant to do this. I think you're hiding something as in it was an accident, you had the knife in your hand, you turned, maybe she ran into you, something like that. I don't know. And you thought telling the story that it was on the table would absolve you of that. Unfortunately, that story doesn't check out. So we know that's not what happened. Okay? Like I said, I do not believe in my heart that you picked up this knife and stabbed her intentionally to hurt her. But you see the conundrum I'm in? You see how, Sergeant Coxwell might think you did this on purpose. Maybe he thinks she's cheating on you, you get mad, whatever.
Cause see, that's why I say, like, when them people pulled up, how them people was like, them people weren't trying to hear nothing. I'm trying to tell these people, like, man, let my daughter go over there to my sister. Then y'all, okay, man. I really don't know, man. But I can't. I don't know. Maybe I come back. Okay, y'all gonna take me to jail? They're gonna take me to jail, and maybe I come back. Like, I'm trying to think of. I can't think of shit. I know what happened.
You do know there was only two people in that room.
Mm-hmm.
You and her.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only one that knows.
And I told y'all what happened. So
but it doesn't make sense, Adolf. It doesn't make sense, man.
What do you think your kids are gonna say? What do you think your kids are gonna say?
I know what my kids gonna say.
How they think they're gonna look at you?
I know how they're gonna look at me.
Because I'm getting ready to go in there and ask them about that TV, how long it's been tore up. And then if they say, "No, it's been working," then it makes you look like a liar to us.
And they ain't got no reason to lie.
I know they don't. I don't understand why they even brought my children here. That's the part that really got me like, for real. Now, if I was that type of person, why y'all got my children here on it? They ain't seen or heard nothing.
Actually, they heard and saw plenty. The first child said they heard Addie and Gable fighting. Trying to block it out, they put on headphones, but about 5 minutes later, they heard Addie screaming. The other child went to check and found their mother lying in the hallway, yelling for help. Neither of them mentioned hearing any loud crashes, and certainly nothing strong enough for Addie to have somehow impaled herself. Now, with evidence like this, detectives are ready to chip away at Gable's story, piece by piece.
They heard plenty.
They did.
Yeah. They heard us getting into it.
And they saw plenty.
Yeah, they heard her getting into it, yeah.
They saw plenty.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, they're witnesses to this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's your story to tell, Adolf. Like I said, there was only two people in the room. Unfortunately, we can prove that your story isn't the truth, isn't plausible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the evidence is going to have to speak.
The thing he's trying to tell you, Adolf, is it's better for you to tell the story instead of us having to tell it for you. And I get what you're saying. You're trying to stick to that of you shoved her and she fell against the thing. It can't happen like that. First off, stab wound's too high. And she's not just going to fall back against that like that. The other thing that's going to get you is the trajectory or the path of the knife wound. Because it's not going to line up with her falling into it. Okay? So, it's out the window. And it just goes from there. It goes from there of making you look like just some evil monster.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But that's.
And I'm not saying that's what happened. We're sitting in here trying to talk to you about it and say, I lost my cool. Man, she got so far up under my skin. I may have been drinking a little bit, but don't
kill nothing back. You drinking a little bit, don't kill nothing back. I ain't stupid by a long shot now.
But like we said, it's your story to tell, and that's why you know, I mean, she's not stabbed 20 times or anything. That shows me that it's not out of anger, that you're not.
That's what I'm saying. Like, why is he keep saying, okay, so y'all know she cheating on me. That's what y'all telling me.
No.
So why he keep saying that then?
I don't know. I do have her phone.
You go through her phone then. I'm not boo-boo the fool, man. I'm not boo-boo the fool.
And I'm not saying she's cheating on me. But, I mean, she's going out,
Yeah.
you know, all the time.
That's what started.
And that's what y'all
But out of 15 years, you mean to tell me out of 15 years now? 15 years. Come on now.
I mean, it took mine 12 and 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So
I only got one by her. That's actually mine.
Is that,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing about that is, I just went and asked Anaya when she saw that TV on last. You know what she just told me? Last night.
Yeah. I cut the TV up. I cut the TV, man.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Okay,
because you're mad. And we get that.
Okay.
That's a normal reaction. Women get up under our skin and, you know, that shit, pow, fucking pop the TV.
Mm-hmm.
I get it.
I cut the TV.
we've been there, man. I've been married. How old are you?
39.
Me and you the same age. You know, we had plenty of women in our lives. You know, some good, some bad.
This is the exact moment that Gable realized no matter what he says or does, he cannot outsmart detectives with a story this absurd. And in moments from now, he's about to tell them what really happened.
No, man, AJ. Man, shit, I'm ready to go. Yeah, I already know. I probably feel when I hit the TV with the knife, she came over there, and then like I just did like this right here, and the knife went in her back. Damn.
That's understandable.
And that's
You feel like I'm not finna pull y'all coattail. I already know how this shit go. Y'all don't care nothing about my children, none of that.
Sure we do.
No, man, y'all listen. Y'all got a job to do, and I respect that. I understand that. I'm not no bad guy. I don't disrespect the police or nothing.
Hey, Dolph, you ain't been in trouble since like 2:30.
And what out for a marijuana charge? Thank you. Vin Diesel
We ain't saying
took me to jail for a piece of blunt this big. I paid $568 for a piece of
you
blunt.
a bad guy.
I don't think you're a bad guy. I've told you that the whole time. And I kind of take offense to you saying I don't care about them children. Because I didn't talk to Wendy. I didn't talk to Angela.
That bit there
I didn't talk.
relevant.
I didn't talk to Clifford. I didn't talk to Miles, his grandmama. I didn't got it all set up to take them home. We've already fed them dinner. We got them root beer that they wanted. So don't tell me I don't care about them children. Because there's only 2 things I care about. And that's children and old people. Okay?
You right.
So the defenseless, the people that can't help themselves.
You right.
All right?
You right. I'm sorry.
So
right. I'm man. I'm sorry.
I appreciate that.
It's just like that shit. Like,
but I'm going to guarantee you, your children are gonna have been taken care of, and they're going to continue to be taken care of.
I'm sorry about that, man. Because I don't need come at y'all like this.
I know you got a lot.
For real,
you got a lot on your
come
shoulder.
at y'all like this. When I be out there and them people say take that in the house, I go right in the house.
Okay.
Since we got that out of the way, what was the argument over?
About for the past couple weeks, like you
Her
been
going
going
out?
Yeah.
You think she had a...
No. That's what I'm see what I'm saying? Like that's not.
It's just the fact of her going out.
Yeah, that's all.
She's got a family at home.
You're at home.
Thank you.
You're at home taking care of the kids,
I'm the mom, dad.
and she's going out.
Okay, you want to go ask them about that TV? Ask them who be at home with them. Ask them who cook dinner. Ask them who walk them to the bus stop. Ask them who do all this shit.
Hey, we know. I've been there. I still do it for my kids.
Man.
My story and your story is a lot similar, pretty similar.
Y'all ain't gonna put me in pieces. Y'all don't understand. Like I am scared of people for real. Like
You got like anxiety or something?
I've been in Meridian. I used to take Ritalin. I get disability for a reason. Like I'm mentally. I've been in foster care from the time I was 7 until I got grown. Like I'm mentally, like I am scared of people for real.
What you taking now?
Nothing,
What you supposed to be taking?
nothing. I just deal with it. I just like long as I have like certain people I know ain't gonna do nothing to me or whatever, but like me, like, oh, I'm finna fight you. I never had one fight my whole life. You can ask my people, I never had one fight my whole life. Not one fight.
It does get frustrating being the one that's home to
Nah, but see that's what I'm saying. I wasn't never tripping about none of that.
Yeah, I mean,
I wasn't never, because
I
I'm
wish
looking
she was
at
there to help me more, but
I'm looking at it like shit. She out going to work doing what she. It just today.
Just piled up.
I'm telling you, like, damn, I want to go to the seafood festival. No, you know I ain't lying. Seafood festival today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going with such. Okay. Boom. Me and this girl, I swear, you watch the camera, me and this girl was just outside talking. When I went in that house and started getting my clothes out that closet, she flipped.
why'd she flip? Because you were leaving? She didn't have nobody to take care of the kids?
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know. I'm ready to go to jail, man. Cause these people got people sitting all out the door and shit, man. I'm
is there
just,
somebody sitting out there?
yep. I'm just ready to go and go to jail.
Just have a seat. Let me see what's going
I
on.
know how this shit
Just
goes.
sit down and have a seat. Let me see what's going on.
I can't even smoke a damn cigarette or nothing. I'm sitting here pouring my heart out.
Ready to get out of this cold room? All right. I made you a promise, right? That you're going to smoke a cigarette when we walk downstairs? All right. He's going to cuff you in front like this. Okay?
All right.
So that you can smoke.
All right.
All right. When we get downstairs after you smoke, we're going to change them around to the back. But don't give us any problems, please.
Oh, yeah, I ain't.
Yeah, you ain't been a problem. I just wanted to let you
I
know.
ain't gonna give you no problem.
But obviously, this is a domestic violence situation, is what it falls under. Okay, so you don't have a bond tonight. You're going to see the judge tomorrow. Okay, you're charged with second-degree murder. Okay, so it's not a first degree. It's not premeditated. It ain't nothing like that. Okay, like I told you. I still believe it was an accident, you know, and I know you told us what happened and all that, but I don't think you consciously said, I'm going to stab this woman. So, and that'll all be in my report and all that, okay? You didn't go there, you know, looking to cause any problems or nothing like that. I believe that. I believe it. What's up?
I just don't want to disturb you, man, but
I know. She's with Angela. Okay? Yep. Both of the girls are.
Ultimately, Adolf Gable pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. As part of his plea deal, instead of facing a potential life sentence, he was sentenced to 20 years in a Florida state prison.
I think we can all agree that being attacked by a bear ranks high on the worst possible fate someone can suffer. This was especially true before modern medicine, but this story is even worse than that. This is the infamous story of a man who was brutally mauled by a bear in the remote wilderness and then left for dead by his companions. As a warning, although the events in this video are fleeting and non-descriptive, they are still highly disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. The story of Hugh Glass is going to be a unique one compared to the other stories featured on the channel, which are typically tirelessly researched for accuracy and compiled through a variety of sources. Before we even begin the story of Hugh's life, and in the interest of full transparency, we have to establish that much of it is unverified and the accounts about him lie somewhere on the spectrum between fact and fiction. Much of what is known about Hugh has been passed down through word of mouth, which is obviously prone to exaggerations and incorrect retellings. In addition, because it's been featured so heavily in popular culture in recent decades, it's close to impossible to separate the authentic from the inauthentic anymore. It's probably most well known as the inspiration behind the award-winning movie The Revenant from 2015, in which Hugh was played by Leonardo DiCaprio. Much of the plot is similar to Hugh's story, but many of the details in the movie are unverified, uncertain, or outright false. So to tell this story, I'll speak in certainties, but take everything with a grain of salt. Where appropriate, I'll also present the different variations of certain events to present a full picture of the lore behind the man and the man behind the lore. So with all of that said, Hugh was probably born in Scranton, Pennsylvania around 1783 to Irish parents, and next to nothing is known about his childhood, upbringing, or early adulthood. The legend begins in the early 30s when some sources say he abandoned a wife and 2 sons to start a new life as a sea captain off the coast of Texas. In 1816, his ship was attacked by pirates captained by the infamous buccaneer Jean Lafitte, and afterward, Hugh and the crewmen he employed were offered 2 choices: either join them and become pirates or suffer an agonizing death. The choice required very little consideration, and Hugh then spent up to 2 years robbing, pillaging, plundering, and killing for Lafitte until he escaped in 1818. Afterward, along with a companion, Hugh successfully traversed from Galveston Island through the shallows of the Gulf of Mexico and on to mainland Texas, but they weren't out of trouble just yet. Hugh and his companion then headed north, and as they did, they trekked through territory belonging to some of the more hostile Native American tribes. The Karankawa, for example, which occupied much of the Texas coast, was known to be cannibalistic, but Hugh and his companion made it through the area without being detected. As they went further north, they also crossed into Comanche and Kiowa territory. They successfully evaded them too, but they were eventually captured by the Pawnee in what is now the state of Kansas. The Pawnees weren't known to be cannibals, but they did practice human sacrifice. Most often, this involved a young captive woman as the central figure in a ceremony known as the Morning Star Ritual. Instead of young woman in this case, the Pawnee decided to use Hugh and his companion, starting with the companion. They then tied the man to a stake and embedded pine slivers into his skin, then lit them on fire. Once these burned like the wick of a candle, his companion was engulfed in flames until there was nothing left. It was clear to Hugh that he was next and there was nowhere to run, so in an effort to appease the chief and hopefully get him to spare Hugh's life, Hugh pulled a bottle of a mineral called cinnabar out of his pocket and offered it to him. Cinnabar was commonly used to make red war paint, makeup, and pottery back then, and afterward the chief took an immediate liking to him. Incredibly, Hugh was then welcomed into the community and lived with the Pawnee for 4 years before leaving. Up to this point, Hugh had always been described as exceedingly brave, bold, and smart, but it was the Pawnee who taught him how to survive and thrive in the wild. When he finally left the tribe in 1822, he came across an ad calling for 100 men to join General William Henry Ashley on a fur trading expedition up the Missouri River. It wouldn't be until the following year when Hugh joined what was known as Ashley's 100, and he set off with them in search of beaver pellets more than 1,500 miles up the Missouri River. For months afterward, the men paddled their boats upstream and were constantly cautious of potential encounters with hostile Native American tribes. Then, in what is today South Dakota, Ashley's 100 entered territory belonging to the Arikara, which is a tribe that played a role in the story of Lewis and Clark on their expedition to the west. Lewis and Clark famously encountered the Arikara in 1804 and convinced them to send a delegation to Washington, D.C., which they did the following year. Unfortunately, while in Washington, the Arikara chief died and the tribe blamed the settlers. From then on, the Arikara were a violent threat to settlers coming through their territory. At least that was something that had been observed on several occasions. In addition, this tribe, like many tribes, settled near rivers and streams, so when Ashley's 100 came paddling up the river, they eventually floated into a village. However, unexpectedly, the tribe was welcoming of the expedition and the two sides arranged several trades. Once the trading was complete though, the Arikara turned on Ashley's 100 and attacked, killing 12 and wounding another dozen, including Hugh. The group did escape, however, and 3 months after escaping and continuing up the Missouri River, the survivors were on dry land, walking 300 miles to a fur trading fort. Still very much in Arikara territory though, the party had to be careful and quiet to keep from being found. At the same time, survival required them to shoot a deer or buffalo every day or two, and the gunshots could be heard for miles around. So inevitably, in June of 1823, the party was attacked again by the Arikara, reducing their numbers even more. The two-time survivors then finally made their way to Fort Kiowa to regroup and rest. While staying there, the party was joined by a man named Andrew Henry, who was Ashley's expedition partner, and he was put in charge of a small group that was sent west to the Yellowstone River. Hugh was among this group, and when they reached the forks of the Grand River in what is now South Dakota, the men split up to scout for game. Then, while slowly treading through the forest, Hugh came around a tree and startled a grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. Hugh's rifle wasn't nearly enough to take down a charging bear, but he didn't have enough time to get a shot off anyway. When the mother bear reached him, she swiped at Hugh's throat and latched her jaws onto the back of his neck before picking him up and swinging him around. Now, what happened next is up for debate, and I also want to give a warning. It's as brief and non-descriptive as possible, but Hugh's injuries were still extensive. In one version of the story, the bear continued to maul Hugh before he managed to kill the bear himself. In another, Hugh screamed for help and the others showed up and killed the bear. Whatever the truth is, Hugh was definitely attacked by a bear and was no doubt in extremely bad shape, as his injuries were well documented in journals by others in the party. The bear attack had resulted in a cut on his throat that was apparently so bad that his breath could be seen escaping through it when he exhaled. He also had large wounds around his body, including his scalp, and another wound on his back was so deep that his ribcage was visible. Even more horrifyingly, where they were was so remote that the nearest settlement was the fort they had rested at, hundreds of miles away. Even if there was anything closer, it was fairly clear to the other members of the group that Hugh wasn't going to survive long. He was conscious, but his breath was labored and he couldn't speak at all. To the surprise of the others, however, Hugh managed to make it through the first night and then the few days that followed, but they were still convinced it was only a matter of time before he succumbed to his injuries. With him surviving longer than they expected and them still need to continue their journey, Andrew called for some of the men to fashion a makeshift stretcher so they could carry Hugh until he passed away. This drastically slowed them down, and after a few days of hauling around the difficult terrain, Andrew asked 2 of the men to stay behind with Hugh until he died while the others went ahead. Because there was extra money in it for those who volunteered, a man named John stepped forward, and right behind him was another man named Jim, who was just 19 years old. He elected to stay as a show of respect toward Hugh, and he wanted to make sure he had a fitting burial when he died. With that, the others resumed their journey while the 2 volunteers started digging Hugh's grave. In the days that followed, John and Jim managed to give Hugh some water past the hole in his throat, but he spent most of the first few days drifting in and out of consciousness. Then he developed a severe fever and the end looked imminent. One version of the story says that the fever was an indication to John that their work was done, so John and Jim gathered up Hugh's rifle, knife, flint, gunpowder, and other supplies he would no longer need before hurrying in the direction the rest of the group had gone days earlier. In another account, John and Jim are attacked by Arikara warriors and had to run off, taking Hugh's rifle with them. Although the first version is seen as much more likely according to scholars. Either way, even in his hazy state, Hugh heard every word the 2 men said as they took his belongings, and he was aware that they were essentially leaving him for dead. Whether this drove him to survive or not, Hugh's fever broke after a few more days and he became much more lucid. Next, it's unclear why it was special, but the rifle the men took was sentimental to Hugh in some way, and in his mind, he was set on getting it back. When he could, he finally looked down and took stock of his injuries and had to have been horrified to see that he was essentially rotting. His wounds were both infected and filled with maggots. Now, as disturbing as that is, this can actually be preferable in some circumstances, as they will eat the infected tissue and promote healing. So rather than clean the wound, he left it as it was. After that, next to where he was left was a buffalo berry bush that he managed to pick some of the berries from. He then ground the tiny berries into a paste and mixed it with spring water before gulping it down. Then a few days later, he noticed a rattlesnake coming toward him, and when it was close enough, Hugh hit it with a rock several times. Then, after removing the venomous head, because he was still unable to move much and without the necessary supplies to build a fire, Hugh consumed the snake raw. It's unknown how long he was immobile and recuperating the forest for, but as his condition kept improving, he knew he needed a plan. Standing was impossible with a broken leg, but he had to get back to Fort Kiowa somehow, even if he had to crawl the whole way back. The problem was that Fort Kiowa was at least 200 miles or 320 kilometers away. There are mixed accounts of how Hugh reached civilization, but in one, he set his own broken leg and crawled most of the way to the fort before finally making it to his feet. From there, he supposedly limped and stumbled the rest of the way, making it to Fort Kiowa in about 6 weeks. In another version, he dragged himself through the forest doing anything he possibly could to survive, including chasing a pack of wolves off a buffalo carcass so he could eat and dry the strips of meat on the journey ahead. At one point in this version, he was found by members of the Sioux tribe, who then took care of Hugh and transported him to Fort Kiowa. After spending some time at the fort, and when he was healed and rested, Hugh got himself some clothes and a rifle with plans of returning to the wilderness to catch up with the Ashley party. After being deserted and what he felt was essentially being robbed by John and Jim, Hugh planned to hunt them down and make them regret their decision. When he was ready to set off, Hugh met some French-Canadian fur traders at the fort who were heading up to the Yellowstone River too. This is where he expected to find John and Jim, so he joined up with the fur traders. They then paddled upstream for 6 weeks without issue until they were attacked by the Arikara once again. Hugh and the traders were on dry land and scattered around the riverbank when the attack began, and the group was apparently caught so off guard that only one of the traders escaped alive. Of course, so did Hugh, and it's believed to be because he was hunting away from the riverbank at the time of the attack. Afterward, once again, Hugh was all alone in the remote wilderness, but he was at least prepared this time. In fact, there wasn't a single thought of turning back, and Hugh pressed on even as winter set in. On New Year's Eve, Hugh came to the fork where the Bighorn River meets the Yellowstone River, and sure enough, that's where he found Ashley's party. As he walked out of the woods, those who were still left in the party couldn't believe their eyes. It was like seeing a ghost. They were told by John and Jim that Hugh was dead, and now there he was, heading right for them. When he reached them though, it was clear he wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. He wanted John and Jim, and he wanted them right away. As it turned out, John left the party not long after leaving Hugh and enlisted in the army. Jim, however, was still with the Ashley party, and Hugh spotted him. Hugh then made a beeline for Jim, fully intending to end Jim's life, but when Jim was cornered, Hugh slowly lowered his rifle. In that moment, Hugh realized that Jim was still an impressionable teenager, and John likely influenced him the day they took his belongings and abandoned him. In addition, Jim was extremely apologetic to Hugh as he braced for a bullet, so instead, Hugh screamed at Jim, but ultimately spared his life. After that was done, the next order of business was the rifle, but Jim explained that he didn't have it. John had taken it with him when he joined the army. After their confrontation, Hugh rejoined as a member of the Ashley expedition, and just shy of March the following year, Andrew sent Hugh and 4 other men to deliver mail to Fort Atkinson in what is now Nebraska. Once the mail was dropped off at a fort, Hugh was ordered to continue on to St. Louis and notify the expedition's financiers of the party's new location at the Bighorn and Yellowstone Fork. When the trek got underway, Hugh started hunting buffalo bulls, which could be used to make what are called bull boats to travel by water. Traveling the river would be faster than walking, so using the large bones of a buffalo to build a frame, Hugh stretched the animal's hide over the bones to create a small, watertight vessel. When the boats were completed, they launched into the northern Platte River, and as expected, they were covering much more distance in less time. The trip continued on until they came upon an Arikara village, almost inevitably at this point. One story says they were under attack almost immediately, and another says the tribe's chief welcomed them into the village, which was a tactic Hugh had witnessed before. It's unclear how they became acquaintances, but in this version, the chief knew of Hugh and invited him for a smoke. But then, while with the chief, Hugh noticed that the other tribe members were stealing supplies from their boat. When Hugh jumped back to his feet, the Arikara began their attack, and 2 of the 5 men in the party were killed. Hugh and the 2 others got away by jumping into the river, but in the frantic escape, he dropped the rifle he had gotten from Fort Kiowa. So alone and without a weapon once again, Hugh pressed on another 400 miles to Fort Atkinson. As with the many times before, Hugh apparently made this long distance on foot, and when he arrived, he learned that Fort Atkinson just so happened to be where John was stationed in the army. As with much of the rest of the story, there are 2 versions of what happened next, but both of them resulted in John remaining alive. In the first, there was a significant hurdle between Hugh and the revenge he so desperately wanted. Killing a United States Army soldier at a United States Army fort had one outcome, and that was Hugh's execution. So instead, before he left the fort for St. Louis, Hugh told John that when he finally left the army, Hugh would be waiting to kill him. In another count, Hugh simply forgives John just like he had Jim, and there was no parting threat. In both versions, an army captain retrieves Hugh's rifle from John's bunk and returns it to its rightful owner. This is where the legend of Hugh Glass comes to an end, and the next we hear of him is in 1833. While on a fur trading expedition, Hugh's luck finally ran out when the Arikara attacked, and he and 2 partners were killed and scalped. It's believed he would have been around 50 years old at the time and that he was buried in an unmarked grave around Bighorn, Montana. So, to reiterate, we know that Hugh Glass existed and that he was attacked by a bear, but beyond that, much of the rest of the story is not so certain. On one hand, a person could have been as tough and as lucky as he was, surviving against all odds and escaping certain death so many times. But it's also likely that many parts of his story have been embellished, changed, or simply forgotten in the 2 centuries since they occurred. In any case, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the form found in the description, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. In December of 1991, a man set off into the Himalayas on what was supposed to be a week-long hike. When the week was up, however, the man was still missing, and what he would go on to endure in the next few weeks would be one of the most prolonged and grueling ordeals in the history of the area. This is his horrifying story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. In September of 1990, Australian medical student James Scott sat down to write a letter. When he was finished, he folded it up, slipped the paper into an envelope, and sealed it before dropping it off at the post office. The letter was bound for an unusual place, the South Asian country Nepal, which at the time was considered a third world country and one of the least developed on Earth. For James, however, the country's plight made it the perfect place for him to fulfill an elective period requirement before he graduated with his medical degree and help those who needed it most. After sending the letter on its way to a Kathmandu hospital, James eagerly awaited a reply that just never came. He was a bit disappointed as the days, weeks, and then months passed without hearing anything back, but James was too determined to take nothing for an answer. So 1 full year later, he had a plane ticket to Nepal in hand and had recruited his good friend Tim Hooper to join him there. His hope was that he could convince a hospital there to let him come on board temporarily to fulfill his medical school requirement, but as it turned out, he wouldn't need to lobby for a spot after all. Just before he was set to fly to Nepal, a response finally showed up, and it was a resounding yes. The hospital informed him that he could begin his elective period at the end of December 1991. Receiving this long-awaited reply was the icing on the cake for the then 22-year-old. James felt like he was on top of the world. He was attending a great medical school and earning top grades, and he had met a woman he planned to marry once he returned to Australia after his residency in Nepal. Everything was just going his way, and while he'd have to leave his family and fiancé behind in Australia for a while, he was excited for the adventure that awaited him in South Asia. James wasn't exactly what you'd call a thrill seeker, but he very much enjoyed staying active. He worked out sometimes 6 times a week through hiking or bushwalking, as it's sometimes called in Australia. He also cycled in some of his home country's most challenging natural terrain, but it was karate that was his real passion and something he truly excelled at. James had earned a black belt and competed nationally, and in 1989 he won his weight class at the Queensland Championships, and later that year he finished 3rd in the Australian Championships. All this is to say that James was young, fit, strong, and capable of taking care of himself. Now, despite his residency not beginning until December, James flew to Nepal in September along with Tim to settle in. He then visited the hospital a handful of times and met the doctors and nurses he'd soon be working alongside, and they got to know him a bit too. And when some of them learned about his passion for staying active, they recommended that he use his downtime before his elective period to begin to trek the nearby Himalayas. For an avid hiker like James, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. The Himalayas obviously aren't just any mountain range, and Kathmandu is like the epicenter of activity as one of the closest settlements to Mount Everest. Interestingly though, while James enjoyed hiking, he wasn't much of a climber. In fact, he was terrified of heights, so climbing a peak like Everest was out of the question, but luckily the Himalayas offer a variety of terrain that was much more suitable for him. After getting settled in Kathmandu, James and Tim immediately started planning a hike up the Jomsom Trail, which is a popular trekking route that takes more than a week to complete and runs through forests, rocky landscapes, and the deepest gorge in the world. And since this was more than just a leisurely day hike, James and Tim wanted to make sure they were prepared. The Himalayan winter was fast approaching, so they set about securing a list of supplies, and they would also hire 2 porters to help carry their gear and a guide to lead them. When the day finally came to set out, James and Tim quickly found it to be an enjoyable trek. As the days passed, they reached as high as 9,800 feet or 3,000 meters and were treated to some of the most spectacular views anywhere on Earth. The weather was cold considering the high altitudes, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as they were prepared for. As they continued on, they even ran into some trekkers who were just wearing ski jackets and sneakers, and soon James and Tim felt a bit ridiculous for being so over-prepared. So just a few days into the hike, they decided to let the guide and porters return to Kathmandu with much of the gear they had brought with them, while they continued on with just what they had in their backpacks. A few days after that, they arrived back in Kathmandu, riding the high of completing a successful trek through the Himalayas. The trip went so well, in fact, that they immediately began planning another one they could squeeze in before James started his elective period at the Kathmandu hospital. And after having a taste of the Himalayas, they figured they'd be able to prepare with a little more knowledge of what to expect. The problem with that assumption, however, was that their next trek would begin in late December, which was a much different animal than a Himalayan September. Their preparation for the Jomsom Trail would have been much more appropriate for their next planned trek, but the ease that they completed the Jomsom Trail gave them a false sense of security. This time, they planned to take the Halambu Trail, which was a much more challenging route, but one with lodges along the way, giving trekkers a chance to eat and rest. When December rolled around and they made their final preparations for the trip, they did so with minimal gear, just enough to fit in their rucksacks. James also brought 10 pairs of underwear, a handful of t-shirts, a pair of thermal underwear, several pairs of pants, 1 sweatshirt, and a light jacket. Additionally, he brought 1 towel, his camera, and 4 different books to read during nights in the lodges. On December 21st, they got their trek started and made it to the first lodge, where they met a few German hikers who were on their way back along the Halambu Trail. And according to the Germans, the trek wasn't that difficult, but there also wasn't much in terms of payoff of things to see. So James and Tim start to have second thoughts about their plans. James then pulled out a map of Nepal that he had, and as was often the case in third world countries, it was old and outdated, but he could at least see some of the other trail options if they want to change course. After looking at the map James was reviewing, the Germans pulled out a much better and newer map and allowed James and Tim to keep it. The pair then set their sights on the Gosenkund Trail, which was an offshoot of the Halambu Trail that wasn't marked on the old map. So the next morning, they got an early start, and along the way, they caught up with a man named Mark Fulton, who was trekking solo. And in one of those small world scenarios, James and Tim immediately recognized Mark's accent as Australian, and the 3 made fast friends. As it turned out, Mark was also planning to take the Halambu Trail, but James and Tim were quick to convince him that it wasn't worth it based on what they had heard from the German trekkers. One of them then suggested they take the Gosenkund Trail together, and it was settled. The 3 men then continued along the Halambu Trail toward the intersection that would lead them to their new route. Along the way though, Tim suffered a leg injury, and as much as he tried to push himself through the pain, it just wasn't happening. Tim then stopped the other 2 and said that he was going to return to Kathmandu. James and Tim then had a quick conversation, and James said he'd return with him, but Tim insisted that he go along with Mark and finish the trek. Tim didn't say it at the time, but it was written all over James's face that he wanted to keep going, so the 2 friends made plans to meet for dinner at their favorite restaurant on Christmas Eve before going their separate ways. As they did, Tim asked James for one of the maps he could follow, and in an absent-minded moment, James accidentally handed him the new map the Germans gave him, the one with Gosenkund. Tim also forgot to hand over the 1 lighter they had between them in case James and Mark would need to start a fire at some point. But either way, James and Mark then continued to trek to the Himalayas for the rest of the day before making camp somewhere around 9,800 feet above sea level. The next day, they made it to an area called Therapati, where the intersection with Gosenkund was. Once there, they noticed several trekkers coming back down Gosenkund toward them, and the 2 groups stopped to chat for a moment, namely so James and Mark could gather some info on what might lie ahead. The returning trekkers said that it was a challenging trail for sure, but there was no snow on it, which made it infinitely easier to traverse. So, satisfied that they were making the right decision, James and Mark thanked the trekkers and continued on to their next lodge. At dawn the next morning, the 2 men awoke to a surprise. It had snowed overnight, albeit with a light dusting, but the clouds were concerning. So just to double check the conditions, they spoke to the lodgekeeper and asked if it was going to snow that day. The lodgekeeper then told them that there was no snow in the forecast and they should be able to make it over the pass with no problems. So around 7:30 a.m., James and Mark departed the lodge and spent about the first hour and a half on a pristine trail, taking in the breathtaking sights of the mountains all around them. As the morning wore on though, conditions changed rapidly. The temperature fell noticeably and more dark clouds rolled in. Soon it also started to snow, but it wasn't anything like what must have fallen overnight. Instead, these were large flakes that severely limited visibility and started to accumulate beneath their feet faster than the 2 men expected. Before long, the storm had dumped 5 inches of snow onto the ground, and the once clearly visible trail was now buried. This caused James to become concerned as they continued on, and he wondered if maybe they should turn back. Before he could say anything though, he and Mark somehow ended up on the opposite sides of a creek, and they could no longer see one another. It would take them 15 minutes of shouting back and forth before they were able to reunite, and James immediately voiced his fears about the conditions to Mark. Mark, however, was unconcerned and convinced that he could find the pass that would lead them back to Kathmandu. James wasn't so sure, and in a move that disappointed Mark, decided his best course of action was to retrace their steps to the lodge where they spent the previous night. Mark, on the other hand, decided that he was going to continue on, so after a brief conversation, they went in opposite directions. As James started on his journey back the way he came, he did his best to follow the footprints, but the snow was falling so hard that they were filled in more and more the further he went. And before long, he had no idea where he was. There were very few landmarks, if any, to mark the trail, and the snow was falling so hard that it was impossible to see more than 30 feet ahead. This meant that James had to face the fact that he was now lost. So next, figuring that the creek nearby must lead to some semblance of civilization, he started to follow it, and in checking his old map, he saw that it ran right to the town of Talu. After 4 more hours of walking, he noticed that the valley he was once in had significantly narrowed and the high rock walls were rapidly closing in on him. As far as he could see ahead of him at this point, he saw that several creeks came together to form a small river, so he continued on. After a short walk though, he saw that the river had come to a complete end as the rock walls alongside him were now closer than at any point previously. It was a waterfall. But still hoping that he could somehow find a way down it, James crept closer to the edge of it and looked down, and immediately he knew he was in trouble. He estimated its height at around 100 feet or 30 meters, and he was suddenly without many choices. Going down was out of the question, and going back was no guarantee either. This left going up as the only other option. Again, James wasn't a climber, but he figured if he get high enough, he might be able to get above the clouds and wait out the weather. James figured that the rock wall was about as tall as the waterfall, and so over the course of the next 2 hours, he went from ledge to slippery ledge as he somehow made his way to the very top. There were times when he was only hanging on by his fingers. When he was finished, he crested over the cliff and collapsed into exhaustion. But as dangerous as a decision as it was to climb, James did find a rocky overhang that gave him some shelter at the top of the cliff. While he regathered some of his strength, he recalled a few lessons from medical school on hypothermia and just how dangerous a condition it can be. So it may seem counterintuitive, but as he settled in under the overhang, he stripped down, pulled out his towel, and made sure to dry every part of his body. He had just spent hours cold and wet, and his clothes were soaked, and he figured it was a lot safer being cold and dry instead. Once he was finished, that night he camped under this rocky ledge with his sleeping bag pulled over his head. In the morning, James got an early start in his desperate attempt to trek out of his current situation. He then located a different creek that he started to follow, but the snow was so deep that the going was extremely slow. After 2 hours, he had walked just a single kilometer. The banks of the gully he was walking on this day weren't nearly as high as the ones he encountered the day before, but they were instead extremely slick with ice and snow. So anytime he felt like his best move would be to climb again, he'd only get so far up before falling back down to the gully floor. By 4 p.m. he had enough and fortunately found another overhang to camp under. Just like before, he took off his clothes and dried himself the best he could and noticed that his feet were completely numb. He then dressed in a set of dry clothing and laid down for the night, shivering much worse than he was the previous night. In fact, at one point, he was certain there was no way he'd make it through the night. He even got up and reached into his backpack for a pen and a notebook and started writing a letter to his family. The guilt he felt for getting himself into this situation was overwhelming, and he couldn't apologize enough for the heartbreak this would cause them. When the letter was finished, he closed his notebook, stored it away, and laid back down, waiting for the end. On December 29th, so 5 days after James was supposed to meet Tim for dinner in Kathmandu, the phone rang at the Brisbane home of Joanne Robertson, James's older sister. Her husband answered the call, and before long, he came downstairs to talk to her. Tim had sent a fax message to James's parents informing them that James was missing. The news obviously rocked Joanne, and she found herself panicked, not sure what to do with this information. Her first thought was that she needed to jump on a plane immediately for Nepal, but by this time, the Australian Foreign Affairs Department had caught wind of James being missing and urged Joanne to stay put. Instead, they recommended reaching out to a mountaineering expert named Carl Harrison who lived in Kathmandu to lead a search for her brother. The next day, Carl and the first search party headed out as James's family waited anxiously. They waited for the phone to ring with the news that James had just been snowed in at one of the trail's lodges, but as the days passed, that call never came. Joanne reached back out to the Foreign Affairs Department for updates frequently, and on January 2nd, 1992, there was finally something. They told her that the search party had received a report of a sighting of a solo trekker from some French-Canadian trekkers, and they were 99% sure it was James. This was a huge relief to Joanne as she called her parents and told them about the good news, but sitting around and waiting for information was becoming too much for her to bear. The next day, she went and got a travel visa for Nepal, and on January 7th, she boarded a flight bound for South Asia. By the time she arrived in Kathmandu, James had been missing for 16 days. On many occasions, James tried trekking out of the Himalayas only to be turned back to his lonely rock overhang by the depth of the snow or the intensity of the snowstorms that continued to roll through. Having brought only 2 chocolate bars that were now long gone, he had no choice but to eat snow to survive, and before long, it became clear that walking out of there wasn't going to be an option. When it came down to it, he knew that his best chance of surviving the ordeal came down to being spotted by a helicopter or waiting until the snow had thawed enough in the spring, which was still months away. From that point onward, the rocky overhang became his new home. He had no food, no fire, and nothing but the clothes on his back and a sleeping bag to keep him warm, so he did the only thing he could do, which were sleep and read. Obviously though, little could distract him from the raging hunger he felt. He thought about food when he was awake and dreamt about it when he slept, but after the first 2 weeks or so with nothing but snow to eat, the hunger eventually dissipated as he leaned on the discipline he learned as a karate student. Almost like he was meditating, he'd do his best to think about particular movements, techniques, and sequences, consuming his mind with every tiny detail. Soon, about the only thing that could break that train of thought was the condition of his feet. He hadn't been able to feel them for some time, and it didn't matter what he did to try to warm them up, nothing worked. Then, one day, he removed his shoes and socks and saw that his feet were completely blue. He then reached into the medical kit and pulled out a pair of dissection scissors. Then, he jabbed them into the side of his foot. The wound quickly bled, but James felt absolutely no pain. He was now terrified that if he did survive the ordeal, he'd lose his feet. But as if this wasn't enough to worry about, he was suddenly reminded one day that he was not at the top of the food chain in the Himalayas. James was awoken one afternoon by horrifying animal screams. He then ripped the sleeping bag over his head and jumped up, looking over the rocky ledge to the slope above him. About 100 feet or 30 meters away, he saw a bush that was violently shaking, but he couldn't immediately make out what was causing it until a large black figure moved into the clearing. It was a Himalayan black bear, and now James was in its sights. James then grabbed the dissection scissors and held them tightly in his hand as he shouted at the bear to come down the slope to him. This was a moment of insanity on James's part, as the only thing he thought was that the bear could give him a quick end. But instead of coming toward him, the bear got spooked and darted up the slope and out of sight. But either way, for the next 5 nights, he heard the bear near his overhang and waited to be attacked. Meanwhile, as James was fighting for his life, the rescue effort was hitting problem after problem. Several different rescue teams entered the Himalayas and were turned back by the terrain, conditions, or weather, and some even got lost themselves. Now in Nepal as well, Joanne was much closer to the search for her brother, but she still felt helpless to do anything, so she did only what she could. She then sought out the French-Canadian trekkers that had apparently seen James, and when she met with them, most of the group were certain that it was her brother they spotted. One of the women in the group, however, wasn't so sure. She remembered talking to a solo trekker from Germany in the days before the sighting and thought she recognized him as the man mistaken for James. And sure enough, search leaders received a letter from a German man who said he was trekking alone on the Halembu Trail. This all but crushed Joanne's hopes that her brother was still alive somewhere. By then, James had been lost for 21 days, and Joanne was growing more and more desperate. She suddenly recalled a conversation she had with a local woman when she arrived at the Kathmandu airport. The two women spoke about James's situation, and Joanne asked her what she'd recommend. And in response, the local woman said she'd go to consult a Buddhist Lama, which is a spiritual leader. To an Australian, this came off as an odd suggestion, but the local woman assured Joanne that Lamas could see what others can't. To that point, Joanne hadn't given the suggestion much consideration at all, but as things became more desperate, she figured it couldn't hurt to do as the local woman recommended. Joanne then scheduled a time with a Buddhist Lama and explained the situation to him, showing him a map of the region where James was believed to be lost. After hearing Joanne out, the Lama prayed on it for a few seconds and then looked down at the map. He then dropped his finger on a specific area, a triangle formed by the towns of Pedi, Gopti, and Talu, and told her that the searchers should look there. The area the Lama pointed to, however, was an unlikely place for James to end up. For one thing, mountain experts doubted there was even a route that would lead them to where the Lama pointed, but he insisted that this is where they'd find James. Before she left, she asked the Lama if they'd find James alive, to which he replied that she would meet her brother again. At the same time, though, arguably, the more practical approach to the search was still underway, which included tracking down Mark. Rescuers still hadn't been able to find him either, and there was some concern that he might be lost in the mountains too. It was known through Tim that Mark had a flight to Thailand after Christmas and he was scheduled to arrive back in Australia sometime before January 21st. A message was then left for Mark at the airport by the Australian embassy, and on January 15th he called Joanne. Mark had made it out of the Himalayas by following another pass he had located, which led him to a local village. He then explained to her that he and James separated somewhere between Pedi and Gopti, which was a striking revelation. This meant James had turned back to the southwest, which was not an area where rescuers were looking for him. If he continued on that path, it would put him right in the middle of the triangle the llama had pointed out on the map. After 30 days stranded in the Himalayas, James finally heard the first signs of any attempt to find him. There was a distinct chopping sound in the distance, which he initially wrote off as the wind, but as it drew closer, it became clear that it was the sound of a helicopter. He then rushed out of his sleeping bag before grabbing it and trudging into a clearing. He then waved the sleeping bag over his head after he dropped his pants to reveal his bright red long johns, which he hoped would make it easier to spot him. He estimated that the chopper was about 6 miles or 10 kilometers away from him, and he watched it circle for a few moments before it eventually turned back and disappeared into the distance. This was one of the most disheartening moments of his time in the Himalayas to that point. By this point, James looked like a shell of himself, and his once muscular body was now more than a skinny skeleton. He also had little strength and felt ill, and he developed mouth ulcers and a bad throat infection. All in all, he was completely miserable and hopeless. This was when he was seriously considering ending things, but the only thing keeping him from going through with it was the realization that his body would one day be found and his family would learn just how much he suffered before death. So, despite the slim chance of surviving or being rescued, James did his best to carry on. On his 42nd day in the Himalayas, he once again heard the sound of a helicopter drawing close to him. With every ounce of strength he had remaining, he pulled himself out of his sleeping bag and once again waved it in the air. For 20 minutes, the helicopter circled James, who waved until he completely collapsed in the snow from exhaustion. Moments later, the chopper darted down the valley and disappeared. This time, though, James knew he had been seen, but he also knew that it would take up to 4 days for them to reach him by foot. By then, he was sure he'd be dead. Back at the rescue headquarters, Joanne sat by the radio like she had every day to that point, waiting for any information from searchers in the mountains. The radio then suddenly crackled and a voice came over saying they had found James and that he was alive. The rescuer made sure to repeat the message twice, knowing that it was such an improbable development that it might not be believed unless it was said multiple times. In that moment, Joanne was so overcome that she couldn't even respond to the message. Sometime later, when the helicopter returned, Carl and a team of rescuers set out on foot. Under the rock ledge high above the mountain valleys, James lay in his sleeping bag listening to only the sounds of silence and wind that he had heard for more than 40 days. Suddenly, a third sound interrupted the other two as he swore he heard voices in the distance. To James, this was it. He had reached the point of hypothermia where he was starting to hallucinate and he was sure death would soon follow. But then the voices came closer. So next, taking a deep breath just to be sure, James whistled loudly through his teeth, not expecting any response. As he waited in silence though, a whistle returned, and upon hearing this, James sat up in his sleeping bag and shouted. As he looked out from beneath his rock overhang, he heard the crunching of boots and soon saw two men who crouched down to look beneath the ledge. One of them then asked if he was James Scott from Australia, and James said yes. The two men then leapt beneath the overhang and started hugging and kissing him. The rescuers had been so invested in finding him that they were overjoyed. One of them then looked at James and said that he was a god. When James asked why he said that, the rescuer told James that no one had ever lived in this part of the Himalayas for more than 10 days. James, however, had survived 43. The next morning, a helicopter flew in and James was attached to a harness and pulled aboard. Back at the landing pad, Joanne anxiously waited the arrival of her brother, and when the helicopter landed, several rescuers exited first and helped James out. He immediately started walking toward Joanne as she ran to him, and the two embraced for what felt like an eternity. She hardly even recognized him. He was dangerously thin, dirty, and bearded. And this would be the last time James would walk for some time as he was taken to the hospital. But he would eventually make a full recovery. The spot where James was found was exactly where the llama said he would be. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you want to listen to the audio-only version of these videos, you can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the form found in the description. And if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. In 1993, 7 hikers set out into a southern Siberian mountain range to hike and explore the beautiful wilderness. Unfortunately, somewhere deep in those mountains, something so horrifying and confusing would happen to them that it's still a mystery to this day. This is their story, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. Lyudmila Korovina was known as a master of survival craft, and at 41 years old, she'd spent decades teaching mountaineering to young students in Kazakhstan. She was known to push people to their limits, and sometimes beyond, to mold them into the best hikers they could be. But despite her reputation for being tough, her past students said she was as good a mentor as you can get, and many of them claimed to owe their lives to the skills she taught them. In 1993, an event known as the Turyada Tourism Festival was taking place, and people representing tourism and mountain sports from all over Russia and the surrounding countries gathered to camp, participate in competitions, and explore the Kamar-Daban Mountains. During this festival, Lyudmila wanted to take a group of her favorite students to do something special and a little more challenging than usual. The Kamar-Daban Mountains are a small chain that form part of Russia's South Siberian Mountains, and they sit near the border with Mongolia near the city of Irkutsk. They stretch 350 kilometers from east to west and are thought to be the oldest mountain range in the world. They aren't the highest by any measure and peak at just under 2,400 meters or 8,000 feet, but they're still challenging and beautiful, and with a railroad that provides easy access, they're a popular destination for both tourists and mountaineers. In the summer, they can get quite humid, and temperatures hang around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 18 Celsius. It also often rains heavily as thunderstorms roll in from the Mongolian plateau. But again, despite the dampness, they're considered a safe destination to go hiking and an ideal spot for young hikers to explore the wilderness. The route the group had planned, though, wasn't one for the average tourist. Generally, trekking has 3 or 4 levels of difficulty depending on where you are. Russia used a 4-grade system at the time, starting with easy for beginners, moving up to moderate, where you walk up small hills for up to 4 hours or so per day, onto strenuous, where you spend much of the day climbing higher peaks, and then very strenuous or challenging, which sometimes uses no trail at all, and hikers will often travel along high ridges and over mountains from dawn to dusk. And how a route is graded comes down not only to how high you go and how long you'll be walking, but also how many skills you'll need, like knowing how to rock climb or navigate in the wilderness. They're also graded on how physically and mentally fit you have to be to complete the route, and the route Lyudmila and the group had chosen was a grade 4, which is the highest difficulty. Knowing this would be the most difficult trek they'd ever done, they spent months leading up to it preparing and training, and over the course of that time, Lyudmila's tough love shaped them into both competent mountaineers and close friends. Finally, on August 2nd, the full group met up to catch the train to Irkutsk. In addition to Lyudmila, there was Valentina, who generally went by the name Valia. Valia was 17 and had been walking the hills all her life and was known for being calm and collected in tough situations. Joining them was also 23-year-old Sasha. He and Lyudmila were close, and she had known him since he was just a kid and often described him as being like a son to her. Sasha was also exceptionally fit and very experienced at this sort of challenging hike. He would act as almost a second coach next to Lyudmila. There was also 19-year-old Dennis, who was sort of an accidental member of the group. He only got his place on the trip when someone else dropped out because their parents wouldn't let them go. He was so excited to be part of the group that all he left was a short note for his parents that he was going to the mountains and he would be back soon before leaving the house. Then there was also 24-year-old Tatiana, who loved walking the mountains but had never attempted anything beyond a moderate grade 2. This was a chance for her to prove what she was made of, and after all the training they'd done, she felt like she was ready to handle anything. Next was Timur, who was the youngest in the group at just 15. He was essentially born to trek though, and grew up in the mountains and hiking with his parents basically as soon as he was old enough to walk. And then finally, there was 16-year-old Victoria. She wasn't a natural mountaineer, but desperately wanted to be a part of the trip. At first, the others weren't happy about this because she'd had a temper tantrum on a winter hike earlier that year after getting tired. She wouldn't have even been there at all if her mother hadn't called Lyudmila and begged her to take her along. But later, during training, she worked hard and regained the trust and friendship of the rest of the group. After meeting up, they started their journey by train from their home in Kazakhstan to Irkutsk. From there, they went to Marino, which is a town at the foot of the range and the perfect spot to set off from. On the way, they were joined by a couple of guys from Moscow, heading to the area to relax and fish by the Sniezhnya River. Then, after arriving in Marino, the plan was to walk until August 5th and eventually meet up with another group led by Lyudmila's daughter, Natalia. Both groups checked the weather forecasts, and things were looking good with above-average temperatures and just a little rain forecasted over the next 4 days. The first 2 days went well, and the group took a slightly more unusual route than most, but in doing so, cut off a bunch of time that helped them summit several of the highest peaks ahead of schedule. They walked around 70 kilometers and crossed the Langutai Gorge, then across high plateaus over several rivers, and then up the highest in the Kamar Daban range, known as Kanulu. Then on the third day, a cyclone coming up from Mongolia took the region by surprise and caused a day of rain that left the center of Irkutsk flooding up to people's knees. That same rain fell hard in the mountains, and at higher elevations, this turned to heavy snow, and the group was walking along a high ridge when the skies opened up and the snow and rain came pouring down. Initially, they decided to press on as far as they could, worried they might miss their rendezvous with the other party. But then as they trudged down the mountain, soaking wet in the pouring rain and wind, realized it was too exhausting to continue. So at about 4 p.m., they decided that instead of heading through the forest to the planned camping spot, they'd set up camp in the open and get some rest. This really wasn't a great spot to camp because it was an exposed and windy patch between two mountains with just some rocks and grass for shelter. The ideal location under the tree line was another 4 kilometers away, but that was just too far to drag themselves and their drenched bags in the ice-cold rain. They obviously couldn't build a fire either, but that didn't dampen the mood. While the rain continued to come down, they did their best to enjoy the night, huddling in the 2 driest tents while talking about what they'd achieved on the hike so far. For some reason, maybe because they didn't want to get them wet on the inside, they never got into their sleeping bags. They didn't even take them out of the plastic wrap and instead just fell asleep exhausted on the floor of their tents on plastic ground sheets. Unfortunately, that night wasn't much better and sleep would be short-lived. At 4 a.m., the ropes to the tents snapped and they had to go outside to fix them. Not long after they'd done that, the wind tore the stake holding the tents down. Then, finally, after a wet and cold night, they woke up to snow covering most of the area. As they got up and cooked breakfast, they found that the snow had covered basically all the landmarks from the day before. After breakfast, at around 11:30, they set off toward the trees, hoping that tree cover would provide some shelter and help them to get their bearings. With any luck, they'd meet the other group ahead of time as they planned the night before. Unfortunately, this is where things took an almost unbelievable turn. According to Valia, just 10 meters into their trek down the hill, Sasha just fell over. They helped him to his feet, but he fell again, and this time he let out a piercing scream. Lyudmila told the rest of the group to keep moving while she returned to help, but in the meantime, inexplicably, Sasha was foaming at the mouth while blood started pouring from his eyes and ears. After falling to the ground a second time, he started violently convulsing, and then by the time Lyudmila could reach him, he'd already stopped moving. Upon seeing Sasha collapse, she cried out for the others to get help as she began trying to revive him, but basically as soon as they started moving again, Lyudmila also screamed out for help. Valia quickly covered the others and then told them to wait where they were and then ran back to Lyudmila and Sasha. In some accounts, Valia claims Lyudmila died the same way as Sasha, but in others, she claims that she'd had a heart attack. Either way, to Valia and the others' shock, Lyudmila passed out and collapsed on top of Sasha. Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur then climbed out from underneath their covering and rushed back to them, but almost immediately, Tatiana started grasping for air too and grabbing at her throat as if she was trying to force her airway open. Then, to everyone's horror, she ran to a nearby boulder and began hitting her head against it over and over until she finally went limp and slumped to the ground. Terrified and having just witnessed the horrific scene, Valia froze and dropped to the ground as well. Dennis, also horrified at what he was witnessing, crouched down and hid behind an outcropping of rocks while trying to get inside his sleeping bags, hoping it could protect him from whatever was happening to the others. Finally, Valia snapped out of it and composed herself and crawled over to Lyudmila and found that she wasn't breathing. Then she went back to Timur, who was by then completely hysterical, and lifted him onto his feet and told him to head for the trees. Next, she took Victoria by the arm and began pushing her out in front of her toward the forest, but Victoria went into a frenzy and started violently pulling away from Valia. Eventually, she even bit Valia's hand, which caused her to let go and then ran off toward the forest after Timur. But unfortunately, they also didn't manage to get far before they both began to cough up blood and started clawing at their throats just like Tatiana. Valia then watched as they started tearing off their clothes as if they were boiling up inside before they both collapsed to the ground. Dennis, who up until then hadn't been overcome by whatever was happening to the others, shouted to Valia to dump all the essentials from her backpack. He then took off for the woods as she began emptying her bag, but almost as soon as he broke cover from the boulder, he began to choke like the others, bleeding from his face and his body seizing as he fell to the ground. Valia then looked around and saw that every single one of her friends was on the ground and not moving, and her normal calm turned into a massive adrenaline surge, so she got up and sprinted, and she kept running until she was deep inside the woods. Finally, she couldn't run anymore, and she was far enough inside the forest and away from the wind. In the calm that follows panic, Valia tried to compose herself again, but supposedly by then, the storm had become so strong that trees were falling like matches around her. She eventually spotted a crack in a cliffside and just wedged herself inside it to hide until the storm died down. While waiting, she thought about her family and she worried about what might happen to her mother if she didn't return home. At the same time, she thought about everything she'd just seen and tried to make sense of it. It was like a literal nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. A little while later, after the storm had calmed down a bit and she had calmed down a little bit, she found what seemed like a safe spot and set up camp. She realized that thanks to Dennis, she still had her pack and some essentials, which thankfully included a tent, a plastic ground sheet, and some clothing. Finally, after setting everything up, she climbed inside her sleeping bag, threw her tent over her for extra warmth, and then completely wiped out, fell into a deep sleep. The following day, she woke up cold and hungry and realized that a tent and a change of clothes weren't enough to keep her alive for long. She had no choice but to go back the way she came to see if she could find supplies in the bodies of the rest of the group, which also meant potentially encountering whatever it was that had caused everything from the day before. When she reached them, she cautiously approached and found that they were still where they had fallen. Then after finding a map and some food from their packs, she had an even worse realization. She had no idea where she was. She had a map now, but the snow cover still made it impossible to spot landmarks. Instead, the best she could do was follow the tree line until she found something that she recognized on the map, so off she went down toward the forest again. Several hours later, after walking across the mountain essentially all day, she spotted an abandoned electricity relay tower in the distance. With this new sign of civilization, she set off once again and eventually reached it by nightfall. It seemed like as good a spot as any to set up camp, and as she did, she wondered if anyone had alerted search and rescue after they missed their rendezvous. It seemed inevitable that soon enough, search and rescue would be scouring the area looking for them. Unfortunately, no help was coming. When Lyudmila's group didn't show up at the meeting point, Natalia and the other team weren't worried. She knew they were strong hikers, that her mother was a master, and there'd be nothing to worry about. She assumed the rain had just slowed them down and she'd see them all when they got home. In the morning and in the light of day, Valia noticed that the tower she'd slept under was just one of a chain heading down the mountain. She guessed that if she followed them down the hill, they'd lead to somewhere she could find help. The route was difficult and the forest overgrowth slowed her progress, but she eventually reached the end and found a small abandoned village that was once supplied by the electricity cables she followed. It was disappointing that no one was there, but then just beyond the houses was a major river. Since the tourism festival was taking place in the area, and part of that was kayaking, canoeing, and fishing, she thought she could use the river to find a route, or at least signal for help. By then, it was late again, so Valia spent another night at the waterside before heading down to the bank to see if anyone would pass by. The following day was a much warmer day, and the heat began to take its toll on her already exhausted body. After walking for another several kilometers, she remembered that in training, she'd been shown how to use a sleeping bag to let rescue parties know where you are. So she draped hers over a bush by the river and then rested and waited, hoping to be spotted. Not far from where she was, a kayaker named Alexander was taking a small group of fellow Ukrainians down the Snezhnia River. It had been a relaxing day, and the thin curtain of snow that lined the banks made the area even more picturesque than usual. The tourism festival made it quite a busy river, with people paddling and fishing down the shore. On his way up, they'd passed a couple of fishermen from Moscow and waved hello. They waved back, as was the custom, as the group dipped their paddles into the clear waters and continued on their way. As they floated along, they spotted a sleeping bag by the riverside as they reached a bend. Stood next to it was the motionless, expressionless Valia. Assuming she was just another person out fishing on the bank, they shouted a greeting at her, but didn't get a response. Valia didn't even move a muscle. Right away, something wasn't quite right about the girl, making them uneasy as they continued down the river. And although they didn't want to, soon enough they knew they had to turn back. It's here that the story begins to break up a bit. Some reports say that Valia was covered in blood and became inconsolable when kayakers approached, but according to the kayakers, there was no blood. One of the kayakers also claims that she looked like she'd recently washed her hair and face in the river. When they got to her and asked what happened, she didn't say a word because she was too shocked and traumatized to speak. Instead, she buried her head into Alexander's chest and sobbed. The kayakers then wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and dug out some antibiotics and other medicine to give her in case she had an infection. After she was bundled up, they all headed back down the river together, and before long they bumped the same fishermen they had met earlier, and Valia instantly recognized them. They were the fishermen from Moscow she'd met on the train. Upon seeing her, they smiled and waved and asked how the others were getting along. This is probably when Valia broke down and talked, although it's not entirely clear. In a garbled frenzy, she told them what had happened. She told them about the screams and the blood. She told them about the cold and the panic. She told them how the two youngest had run away only to fall to the ground and how Tatiana smashed her head against the rock. And obviously, after hearing this, her new friends were horrified and confused. None of what she said made sense. They decided to look after her from then on and helped her back out of the wilderness to let police know something had happened to the rest of her party. They even arranged for her train ticket back home once it was all over. It took a few days before Valia could tell the story in a way that anyone could understand, but once it was clear that something had happened to the others, the police commissioned a helicopter to go and search for them. The weather and other factors made it impossible for them to get off the ground until August 21st, nearly 2 weeks after the incident. And as it happened, they weren't the only people missing in the region. 2 other hikers had been reported missing on August 17th. After 5 days of searching, they spotted the pair who, like Valia, had found a good spot to wait for rescue and covered a bush with their sleeping mats so they could be spotted. Then, right after the helicopter took off with the pair on board, they spotted the missing party, and it wasn't a pretty sight. The bodies of the group were found on a small ledge, and some were huddled together while others were some distance away. During those few weeks, the bodies had begun to swell up, while insects, animals, and normal decomposition had started to destroy what was left. Many of the battle-hardened recovery team threw up at the sight of them. To make the scene even more horrific, everyone in the group seemed to have removed most of their clothing, with most of them wearing only thin tights. 3 of them were barefoot, apart from the 2 youngsters who tore at their clothes, which Valia hadn't mentioned in her story. The bodies were eventually wrapped in plastic and flown to a nearby city for autopsy, and weirdly, the autopsy found that they had all died from hypothermia except for Lyudmila, who had died of a heart attack. They also had bruising in their lungs, suggesting some issues with their breathing, and even more strangely, they were all on the brink of starving and were found to have critically low protein levels. So what caused these deaths is still a mystery. There are a few ideas, some more likely than others, but they all have problems. One idea is that they accidentally witnessed a military experiment and were murdered to keep them quiet, and then their deaths were covered up by the authorities, which is why Valia's story doesn't match what was found in the autopsy. After all, they had strayed from the usual route, and who knows what was going on in the early years of post-Soviet Russia. This doesn't explain how Valia survived, however. On top of that, as far as we know, no one tried to shut her up after she told her story. After the incident, Valia studied at college and left Kazakhstan for a new life, and now with a family, she's only once spoken about the incident and swears she never will again. She claims that she just doesn't want to relive the nightmare. At the same time, she's never retracted her original story. If she had been coerced into keeping quiet, why would she tell everyone a story that only makes things more mysterious? Why not just say they froze to death because they weren't ready for such a big storm and she was the lone survivor? And that's another problem with the secret government operation idea. It's a popular area where a lot of people go hiking, and it was even more popular at the time because of the tourism festival. It seems unlikely that a secret government project would use that spot when the mountains just a few hundred miles away are much more remote. So if it wasn't a government murder and cover-up, could the government have killed them accidentally? Russia has been known to use nerve agents in the past, and it even has a class of poisonous gases that fit the symptoms that Valia described. They were developed around 1993, and some reports claim they were tested in the Kamar-Daban region. This type of nerve agent was even famously used to assassinate a Russian double agent and his daughter in Salisbury, England in 2018. And if it was this nerve agent, some people think the rain might have had something to do with it. These poisons can dissolve in the water and hang around for long periods of time. And if they were testing the poison in the mountains in the weeks or months before the trip, the excess toxin could have been washed down in the heavy rain. At some point that morning, Sasha might have accidentally stepped into a pool of that poison. Then after stepping in it, when Lyudmila rushed over to help him, she was poisoned as well, followed by Tatiana, Victoria, and Timur, and finally Dennis, who by crouching on the ground also became contaminated by poisoned groundwater. This theory could also explain why the police waited so long to begin their search. They might have needed to make sure the area was clear. However, again, it doesn't explain how Valia survived. She got to the first 2 victims before anyone else and touched the arm of someone who could have been contaminated. That should have been enough to kill her. On top of all of that, it would have just been the worst luck for those chemicals to have seeped into the ground just at the right time and in the right amount to contaminate a single hiker who then killed everyone else, all while never infecting anyone else anytime that year. So another theory is that if they were poisoned, it didn't necessarily have to be a military nerve agent that made them sick. Maybe it was just their drinking water that was poisoned. High in the Kamar-Daban Mountains is Lake Baikal. As well as being a tourist attraction for its beautiful landscapes and popular trails, it's also where tens of thousands of tons of toxic waste have been dumped. A pulp and paper mill has been dumping chlorine and other nasty chemicals into lakes since 1966, and excrement and fuel have also been pumped in at least that long. One idea is that the group had been topping up their water in the rivers downstream of Lake Baikal that morning, and they were hit by something like chlorine poisoning. But then again, how did Valia survive when no one else did, and why did it only happen to this one group? You'd expect more reports of people becoming sick after topping up their water balls in local streams, especially given how big the lake is and how close it is to some big towns and villages. But there are just no other reports, so if it wasn't nerve gas or something they drank, maybe they hadn't been poisoned at all. Maybe Valia was simply mistaken. Another theory is that the account that Valia told was simply her mind trying to cope with trauma. Human brains don't remember things perfectly. That's because the job of memory isn't to keep a perfect record of what we've done. Memory keeps hold of any information that our brains think might be useful in the future, bits and pieces that might one day help keep us alive. Some psychologists believe that's why people who nearly drown say they see their whole life flash before them. It's your brain's way of trying to find something from your life that can help you get out of the situation. At the same time, our brains also twist and distort our memories to help us make better sense of things, especially when things are traumatic. The group might have died of hypothermia as they camped out, exposed, wet, hungry, and without a fire to warm them. Valia might have survived because she was fitter than the others, had warmer clothes, was sleeping in a slightly warmer spot, or was just lucky. Then when she woke up, she would have found her friends dead or dying, some of them without their clothes due to paradoxical undressing, and then she could have panicked and run. When asked, all Valia will say was that the cold rain was the cause of what happened and that Ludmila isn't to blame. But maybe she was, and Valia couldn't cope with that. As a survival mechanism, maybe her brain ignored her instructor's bad choices and it gave her a false memory of what happened. It wasn't just a poorly planned hike gone wrong, but some terrible, mysterious sickness that passed from one to the other. The chief specialist of the area's rescue service thinks that this is the most likely explanation. He puts it down to mass psychosis caused by hypothermia and exhaustion. However, even he pointed out that others survived heavy snow at the same time the group was out, so why not them? He thinks that this might simply have been because they weren't prepared for the storm, but at the same time, they'd spent months getting ready with a known master mountaineer with a reputation for excellence, so could that be true? They were supposed to be prepared for anything, and it doesn't explain how Valia's training was good enough to keep her alive, but not the others. So, with Valia refusing to open up about what happened and so many problems with each of the proposed theories, the Kamar Daban disaster might always remain a mystery. In any case, I'm curious to hear what all of you think happened, so let me know down in the comments which explanation you think is most likely. If you enjoyed this video, this is part of a series, so you might want to check out the other videos in the series. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to send it to the email found in the description. We also have a scary, interesting Discord, which I will also link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
Vicious, disgusting, vile, villainy. These are words that are commonly used when talking about apostles in the world of Berserk. But there is one apostle in particular that I would hesitate to assign these words to, and that would be Rosine, the little girl who wanted to be an elf, but instead became a monster. The Lost Children chapters are regarded with high praise due to its poignant storytelling. It's possibly one of the most thematically rich parts of the manga with its dark subject matter involving children. This also means it's one of the sadder parts of the manga, which, for whatever reason, we like that. I think one of the things people like about these chapters is that, in comparison to other sections of the manga, the Lost Children chapters are relatively self-contained. It's like a mini-story, making it easy for us to focus on a singular thing and digest it effortlessly. The topics prevalent in the Lost Children chapters are touchy, but important for each of us to recognize. And we will discuss them in greater depth. But before we do that, we need to learn about the central character of discussion for this video, Rosine, whose first appearance predates these chapters. Rosine's first appearance is in chapter 52 during the Golden Age arc. You may recall the moment where Rickert is with a bunch of the Band of the Hawk who are under R&R and apostles appear and kill nearly everyone present. Well, moments before that, Rickert is fetching water and he sees a sort of magical sparkle upon the river. And just like Rickert, we recognize what it is. An elf. Puck enters Berserk with its first arc, the Black Swordsman arc, giving us a slither of goodness and hope in contrast to the dark world that surrounds him. Guts is the broody, edgy type, and the elf helps balance the scales by playing a character that is almost opposite to Guts. Later in the manga, he even says that without him, this story would be incredibly dark and dull. So when we see a similar looking creature later in the story, we, just like Rickert, assume it's an elf, a creature of good nature. But we can quickly dismiss that assumption as screams fill the air. Rickert returns to the camp and finds the campfires burning idly. Apostles appear from the darkness, revealing why nobody is around. We then come to realize that the thing we thought was an elf was indeed one of them, an apostle. Our expectations subverted. Luckily for Rickert, Skull Knight appears and tells the apostles to basically pack it up. Rosine then makes a mannerism that is childlike and similar to the behavior of an actual elf, leaving us wondering if there is more to this apostle than meets the eye. But we would have to wait many, many chapters till we see her again. After Guts saves a young girl called Jill from being killed by demons, Puck shows up in front of the girl's face, who shouts, "No!" in terror. She's terrified of this friendly guy. She asks if he is an elf from Misty Valley, and similar to Puck, we don't know what she's talking about. But then we are shown the reason why she is so fearful of elves. A bunch of men get surrounded by a swarm of these elves. One says, "This ain't no kid's fairy tale." We once again see the same creature we saw in the Golden Age, who says, "Yes, this is a fairy tale for children." And we can only make assumptions of what happens next, but I can tell you, I don't think it involves reading a fairy tale story. Next, we go to the village where Jill lives, and the site is interesting, for though the town has people living in it, the streets are vacant. Instead, everyone is inside, hiding away from something outside. We then come to learn that the villagers are afraid of elves who commonly terrorize this very place. And so when they see the lone elf that is Puck, they become very hostile, claiming that his kind attacked the villagers. Of course, the villagers gather outside their homes and get their weapons out. Guts has no choice but to defend himself. He then eventually escapes and finds a windmill shed to lay down for the night. Jill, curious about the swordsman, joins later on and falls asleep next to him. When the black swordsman wakes, he has many questions, but the one he asks first is about the Misty Valley. Jill says the valley east of the village over the mountains had a mist that constantly hung around it, hence why they called it the Misty Valley. And legend says that elves had lived there for a long time. For years, the village had fields, storehouses, livestock, and crops devoured by these mysterious creatures that the people of the village swore were elves. When Puck hears of this account, he is left puzzled as the actions done by these supposed elves do not resemble anything of his kind. For one, they kill humans, and two, they take children away from the village. And speak of the devil, a swarm of these elves are seen above approaching the village. We see Guts' brand bleed, which confirms they're not really elves. There's something else. And by the time Guts reached the village, the creatures had already gone to work, killing a family and their dog along with some livestock. When the surviving child is running away from the ravenous swarm, Guts comes to him, asking the kid if he either wants revenge for his mom and dad or to go with the elves. The kid instinctively chooses the first option, in which Guts uses the kid as a bait for the swarm of elves to follow him to a nearby barn.
Jesus Christ.
Here we see the true nature of these elves as they transform. They looked somewhat similar to Puck before, but now they look anything but. Now looking like hornets and wasps, you know, the insects that literally no one likes. Well, I guarantee someone that's watching this video likes them, so except from you, you special little person.
Yeah, you fucking prick! Fuck you! Fuck.
Guts, now in the position he wanted to get the vermin in, pours gunpowder all over the barn and ignites it through the use of his arm cannon, instantly extinguishing all of the creatures inside. Yeah, you know what? I don't blame him, because when I see even the smallest of spiders in my room, I really start to sympathize with pyromaniacs. After the creatures are gone, the queen of them appears, Rosine, whose appearance looks somewhat similar to that of a butterfly or a moth with its overall look and the patterns on the wings. Rosine is actually impressed with the strength of Guts, considering he is a human. Guts sees right through the gleeful facade that the creature is putting on. It is no elf, but amidst this interaction, Puck notices how the creatures are speaking. There's something off about these creatures. They're too similar to children. As Guts swings Dragon Slayer towards Rosine, he misses as the Queen Elf appears to be quicker and lands a deadly strike on him before Guts has time to counter it. She then begins to glow, which fuels Guts' rage. Puck, coming to an understanding, pleads with Guts to stop and listen to him because they're not elves, they are children, which makes absolute sense considering their attitude and mannerisms are just like how one would act. Another revelation occurs as Rosine calls Puck Pikaf, a popular folktale from Jill's village. Jill realizes that it's Rosine. Rosine is about to attack Guts once again, but Jill jumps in front of the Black Swordsman, telling Rosine to stop, which, surprisingly, works as she disengages and verbalizes that she remembers Jill, illustrating that some humanity still remains within this apostle. Once Rosine leaves the scene, Guts collapses due to the poisonous sting. The hostile villagers come over towards Jill and Guts, blaring questions at him if he's responsible for the carnage that had just happened. We are then shown a shocking image of what remains of the burning barn. Dead children that belong to the village. We know that once apostles are dead, their physical shell of who they were before they transcended to being an apostle is left behind. This confirms that these horrible creatures were in fact just children. Feeling a sense of panic and tapping into his darker side, Guts thinks quickly and uses Jill as a hostage to escape the town. As the villagers, no doubt, look at Guts as the problem. And once Guts is a fair distance away, he lets Jill go and tells her to buzz off back to the village. But Jill is intrigued by Guts and wants to continue with him towards the Misty Valley, where the big elf who once was Jill's friend is located. Guts is like, yeah, I'm about to go kill that girl. Damn, I forgot how edgy he was. And she's left pondering her circumstance. What I didn't mention before is that Jill lives with an abusive father who is often drunk. We will learn to understand that it goes a bit deeper than this and how alike her life is to her former friend Rosine. Conflicted about returning to her village where she has a good idea of what's likely to happen, she decides to take a gamble and follow the mysterious Dark Warrior. As night comes, Guts knows it's going to be a long night, but he is surprised when he sees the children from the barn come to haunt him. As he fights them, Jill sees a black swordsman in a trance of rage. And if you didn't get the message the first time around, yes, they are children, as one of them asks for their mother. To which Guts is like,
"Get the fuck out of here."
Jill is unsettled by the scene, so she steps in front of him, which breaks him from this trance he is in. However, they are pushed off the cliff where Guts actually protects Jill from the fall. See, he does have a heart. Guts is like, why in God's name did you follow me? And Jill doesn't respond with an answer, so then Guts asks about Pikaf, in which we are told about a fairy tale. Pikaf was a boy who was bullied by the children of the village for how he looked. To the point he even thought, this isn't my home, these people aren't my real parents, as no one, including his parents, looked like him. Thus, he went to the Misty Valley where he found individuals who looked exactly like him. However, he was rejected as he wasn't a true elf. One informed Pikaf that a man and a woman brought a baby to the forest who was close to death due to illness. Breaking the law of their village by entering, they pleaded to somehow save the child, in which their wish was granted. The baby's life was saved with magic. However, his appearance was altered to half resemble the elves. The parents didn't care, they were just happy their child could live. Pikaf ran off in a great haste, understanding that he had been loved all along. Unfortunately, time acts differently outside the valley, and his parents and the village were long gone. Pikaf had nowhere to go. We find out how this is relevant to Rosine in the following chapter, where we learn some important backstory about her. Jill, who was 4 years younger than Rosine, looked at her like she was a big sister, though she was said to be strange. She liked catching bugs and small animals to show Jill, and liked doing things such as playing in the woods and streams and collecting weird objects, which was viewed as an activity a boy would typically do. One of these objects in particular was an egg-shaped stone, which we already know is a baylet. Reflecting on it now, Jill remembers that they would stay out late till the sun started to set, as Rosine often avoided going home. This is because Rosine lived in an abusive household where she often had bruises on her cheeks and arms. In the past, their village got wrapped up in a big conflict. Many escaped the village, however, some women did not manage to escape in time. One of these was Rosine's mother, who was violated by a soldier. Rosine's father was unsure whether he was the father, and so she had to grow up listening to remarks like, "Is that girl really my daughter?" We can also assume, because of the bruises from Rosine, that the father also got physical with her. This ultimately leads to Rosine making a decision that changes her life forever. On one rainy night, Rosine came to Jill's house, and standing in the pouring rain with an almost crazed look on her face, Rosine announces to Jill that she is leaving home to go to the Misty Valley, the land of elves. It seems that though the fairy tale of Pikaf is just that, a fairy tale, it is as real as anything can be to Rosine, and so she is going to follow in the footsteps of Pikaf, as she thought she was just like the fairy tale character. And she went missing and was never found again, and her parents also vanished soon after. Guts is familiar with the baylet and he's like, her parents vanished soon after, yeah? Is that right? And lays it down for Jill that basically who your friend was is no more. It is now a demon, and if she steps in front of Guts again, he ain't stopping his sword. So he leaves Jill as he goes hunting for Rosine. However, once Guts leaves, Rosine shows up to Jill, and Jill is frozen in place and doesn't know how to act. And perhaps sensing unease in her friend, Rosine changes her look ever so slightly to resemble a more human-like face, which is what Jill remembers her as. And this interaction is interesting as Rosine, though an apostle, doesn't act like a typical one would. Instead, it's just like how she was when she was a human, giving off this air of youthful innocence, only she looks considerably different. She invites Jill to the Misty Valley, but Jill is conflicted as Guts' words are echoing in her mind. Speaking of Guts, he comes out of the woods like the speed of sound and attempts to strike the elf apostle. This is funny because I'm trying to picture what Guts was doing before this. Did he go into the woods expecting Rosine to show up and he just hit for the right time to come out? Was he like, I'm going to go in these woods, I'm going to hide behind the tree and she's going to show up, and when she shows up I'm going to charge out of here. Anyways, she flies away with Jill and her face molds back into what it was previously, and Jill is frightened at the sight, pleading for Rosine to stop. But Rosine manages to calm her down by taking her on a flight and wows her by showing her the incredible view of the world below them. She says you can fly all you want if you become one of us. This tells us a couple of things. One is that Rosine seems to have a twisted view of what she is and what she plans on Jill to become, viewing it as a significantly better way to live life. Secondly,